The transformation of Apostle Paul. Have you ever heard of a biblical character named Apostle Paul before? Some of you may know him to be a fearless preacher of God's Word and a major contributor to the New Testament. Or perhaps a mere persecutor of the early Christian churches. All in all, he has a story that even we can learn from today, such as why change is good. Now, before we get into it, yes, change can be pretty scary. Whether that's learning how to be independent, moving to unfamiliar places, or even meeting new people. But change is needed for growth. Given it's important here in the world to reach our potential and succeed, it's just as important spiritually too, and is needed for us to perceive God's will and purpose. Who's someone that had to change a lot in the Bible? Apostle Paul. For starters, Apostle Paul was originally called Saul. And let me tell you, he was quite the popular fellow back then. He learned under a leading authority figure at the Sanhedrin named Gamaliel. Not only was Paul an expert in Jewish law, he learned from Pharisees who were esteemed, such as Gamaliel. Saul was advanced in Judaism beyond many of the Jews, grew zealous in their traditions, and was adamant in hence persecuting the Christians for legalistic righteousness. In the eyes of the law, he was faultless. So how did he change? And what does that have to do with us? Saul once lived for the acknowledgement of man and thought it was good. One day he experienced a light from heaven suddenly flashing around him. He fell to the ground and heard Jesus' voice asking why Saul was persecuting him. After this encounter, Saul became blind until God sent Ananias to help him see. From this time, Saul's mindset started to change. Saul began to preach afterward, and as he continued to be full of God's word, he acknowledged how much his old self was like rubbish, despite how great he was in the eyes of man. He was eventually called Paul and worked harder than all the disciples and sought only acknowledgement from God. It came to a point where he willingly suffered in carrying out God's work as he was imprisoned, flogged, lashed, stoned, shipwrecked, without sleep, food, and water. In the end, Paul made the biggest sacrifice for his faith and was martyred. How did Paul change so much? His eyes became open to the reality of God's standard being greater than man's. He grew hope in God's promises and pursued God's will, regardless of what it took. This is a mindset we can learn from today too. We can't accept complacency and guessing through our own lens, but rather, we must see God's perspective and the heart He has in wanting to help us grow. Hopefully, in seeing this, we can take the initiative to even transform ourselves in understanding more of God's Word.
Hey, mortal friends! Thanks for visiting us at EZBible. Don't forget to click the like and the subscribe button. God bless.